Lord Peter Death Breeden Wimsey, 12th and most erratic holder of that ancient name, disliked arriving anywhere before the fires were lit. The drawing-room at Ellerton Court, in particular, looked quite indecent in the chill April dusk, without its customary arm-length flames dancing behind the brass fender. Yet here he stood, balancing on the hearthrug, gazing at the empty grate with a fastidious melancholy, like a connoisseur affronted by a wine list that omits the port. "Sero veniunt ignes," he murmured, tracing a finger through the dust upon the marble mantel. "They light the logs too late. Really, Parker, this place is in a shocking state of pagan neglect." Chief Inspector Charles Parker, on leave, lured by the promise of country air and an ancient carp pond, grunted from the window seat. "You invited yourself, Peter. I merely mentioned a trout stream." "True, my dear fellow, but one expects civilization even in the provinces. A hearth without fire is like a bishop without epigrams, positively heathenish." Wimsey made a show of flicking his monocle open and shut, as though debating whether the glass deserved to witness such barbarism. The house, for its part, replied with a long wooden creak, an elderly, arthritic protest from the beams overhead. Outside, twilight clung to the yew avenue like a damp great coat. Inside, the corridor smelt of beeswax and boiled fowl, and somewhere farther along, the dinner gong thrummed a single exploratory note, as if testing whether the silence was load-bearing. "It's not like the Ellertons," Parker said, rising. "Sir Alured's a punctilious host. He'd sooner let the roof fall in than keep a guest warming his own feet." "At present," Wimsey drawled, "I'd settle for my feet remaining attached. They feel in imminent danger of snapping off at the ankle, like undercooked asparagus." Before Parker could remark that this was biologically improbable, the door burst inward with the velocity peculiar to well-polished oak and urgent servants. Chivers, Sir Alured's butler, tall, sepulchral, and apparently carved from smoked elm, appeared. He spoke in a tone that implied condolences for the continued existence of everyone present. "My lord, Chief Inspector, begging your pardons, Sir Alured requests your immediate attendance in the North Library. There has been an occurrence." Wimsey's eyebrow performed an elegant entrechat. "Not, I trust, a literary occurrence? He hasn't taken it into his head to read The Revolting Bridegroom aloud?" Chivers's features underwent no discernible change, but a gust of something colder than the hall's temperature insinuated itself into the room. "I fear, my lord, that Colonel Calthorpe has, met with an accident. Sir Alured believes you might, advise." "Calthorpe?" said Parker. "The fellow who breeds those sinister Sumatran chickens." "The same, sir." "Capital!" Wimsey snatched his hat from an occasional table, entirely without purpose, then realized his error and returned it. "Come along, Parker. It seems one must earn one's supper here by a little honest homicide." They followed Chivers through passages whose panelling held more family secrets than the parish register, each step raising the faint smell of floor polish and extinction. At a turning, Wimsey paused to inspect a grandfather clock. Its hands stood at 23 minutes past 6. He tapped the glass. The pendulum swung obediently, yet the minute hand remained stubborn. "Curious," he murmured. "Time taking a small holiday." "Your lordship," ventured Chivers. "Merely noting that every household has its idiosyncrasies," Wimsey said. "Lead on, Charon, to the Styx, or in this case, the North Library. which amounts to the same thing." They entered a long, oak-shelved chamber, smelling of vellum, peat smoke, and sudden tragedy. The great fireplace here was blazing merrily, the only blaze in the house, it seemed, and on the Persian rug before it lay Colonel Bernard Calthorpe, D.S.O.s, late of the 9th Lancers. His once formidable moustache bristled in affront at death, but his eyes, protruding slightly, suggested death had returned the compliment. Sir Alured Ellerton, grey-haired and greyer-faced, stood rigid beside an escritoire, knuckles white upon its edge. Lady Ellerton, a slim woman of unyielding posture, held a lace handkerchief to her lips, though there were no tears to endanger the lace. Beyond them loomed the usual accoutrements of familial scholarship: a globe, a set of dueling pistols under glass, 3 gloomy portraits, and an embarrassingly cheerful canary in a domed cage, presently silent as stone. Parker knelt to the body, professional instincts clicking into gear. "Broken neck, by the look. Fell awkwardly." "Perhaps," Wimsey said, declining to crouch. Instead, he paced the worn hearthstones, scanning soot marks and scattered ash. "Observe, Parker, the fire was lit before supper." The remark gained him a puzzled stare from Sir Alured. "What of it?" my wife insisted. "The evening was chilly." "Indeed, a commendable domestic impulse. Yet I note," he pointed delicately with his stick, "the absence of tongs in the grate, the poker neatly returned to its stand, and Colonel Calthorpe lying not quite parallel to the boards, as though something prevented him adopting a more convenient angle of collision. Curious trifles, no? But trifles make the sum of— "Peter, for heaven's sake," Parker said under his breath. "The man is dead." "So he is, and dead men tell no tales, save to attentive listeners." Wimsey turned to Sir Alured. "Did you discover him thus?" Yes. Bernard had been reading in here before dinner. When the gong sounded, he didn't appear. I came to fetch him, found him already. Gone." Sir Alured's Adams, apple bobbed like an inept semaphore. "Any obstacles on which he might have tripped?" Parker asked. "Only the hearth-rug." "Which has remained obstinately flat under generations of boot heels," Wimsey added. "One might sooner trip over the 10 Commandments." He stooped, just once, retrieving a tiny disc of metal from the brink of the fire. "A cufflink," he pronounced, studying the crest. "Not the Colonel's, however." He slipped it into his pocket. "Forgive the appropriation, Sir Alured. The dead have little use for jewellery, and I have an idle curiosity." Sir Alured looked as though he might object, thought better of it, and merely nodded. Parker rose, brushing imaginary dust from his knees. "We'll require the local police, of course." "By all means," said Wimsey. "Summon them, and meanwhile let us confer with the household, for if the Colonel's neck broke itself, it chose an oddly theatrical moment, and I dislike theatrics carried out without my invitation." Lady Ellerton lowered her handkerchief. "You speak very coolly, Lord Peter." "Chill breeds clarity, Lady Ellerton. So I am told." His smile contained the barest tincture of apology. "Besides, the fire suffices for warmth. It was lit before supper, you know, and most punctually." With that paradoxical comfort, Wimsey strode to the bell pull and tugged. Somewhere in the distance, a servant's bell jangled, a brittle, accusing voice. In its ringing pause hovered questions of rugs and clocks and cufflinks, all waiting to be properly introduced. Almost absent-mindedly, Wimsey addressed Parker. "You may take charge of the tiresome formalities, my dear. Interviews, statements, the usual. I shall busy myself with something less obvious, like the geometry of fireplaces." Parker sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern. "Very well. Only promise not to build too many castles in the ash before we've even tasted the soup." "Castles, no," said Whimsy, drifting toward the door with an amiable vagueness. "But one must sometimes light a fire to see which way the smoke blows." And he was gone, leaving behind the Colonel's silent body, a room abruptly colder despite the crackle of logs, and a gathering sense that the very timbers of Ellerton Court were listening, waiting for the next question that would set the whole polite edifice creaking. Parker remained to guard both corpse and host, while a shaking Chivers was dispatched for the village doctor and the local constable. Left to his own devices, and, as he would have put it, to the infinitely more instructive society of inanimate objects, Whimsy drifted from the North Library into the adjoining passage as unobtrusively as a draught under a door. The electric sconces had not yet been lit. Dusk seeped through clerestory panes, turning the panelling the color of watered ink. Somewhere behind the scullery wall came the determined thump of a rolling pin and an aggrieved voice arguing with pastry. Whimsy paused to listen, head cocked like a bird on a telegraph wire, then advanced towards the kitchen territories. He found Mrs. Goodbody, monumental in gingham, stuffing a partridge while maintaining an acrid monologue addressed to the absent scullery maid. At his approach, she recoiled with an exclamation, flour puffing from her sleeves. "Mercy, my lord, you gave me a start. Beg pardon. I'd no notion anyone civilized would venture back here afore dinner." "Civilization is a movable feast," Whimsy observed, helping himself to a walnut from a Delft dish. "May I filch a moment of your time? We are trying to reconstruct an inconvenient half-hour." Mrs. Goodbody's eyes widened. "It's true what Mr. Chivers said, then. The Colonel. Alas, yes, neck snapped like a twiglet, poor chap. Now, your oven has been cockerelling away since 5 o'clock sharp. Sir Allured likes his birds rested." Admirable principle. Did anyone come in from the library corridor between, say, 5 and 6? "Only Ivy, bringing back the tea things, and Mr. Chivers squinting at the barometer as though the weather weren't already plain as sin." She sniffed. "If it's about that fire being lit so early. 'Twas Ivy what mentioned the Colonel had took a chill and asked special for a blaze." "Interesting. Thank you." Whimsy bowed and ambled onward, walnut still in hand. In the servants' hall he discovered Ivy herself, pinched, freckled, hair secured by an optimistic ribbon, trying to coax a coal scuttle into invisibility behind the door. She started guiltily when the monocle gleamed at her. "Don't mind me," said Whimsy, merely admiring the coal scuttle choreography. "Tell me, Ivy, when you brought the Colonel's tea, was the fire already alight?" "No, my lord. The grate was laid but empty. Colonel said I was to fetch a spark this instant. His very words, my lord. So I went for Mr. Briggs, and he brought the sticks and split logs. 5:45, that was." And Briggs remained to see the first flame catch. "He did, my lord. Colonel didn't want no smoke blowing back. I set the tray and went. Briggs was poking it proper when I shut the door. That'd be 5 to the hour by the long corridor clock." "The same clock that has lately suffered paralysis at 23 minutes past." "Oh, that thing sticks if you slam the green baize door. Mr. Chivers always gives it a tap after supper." Whimsy smiled approval. "Indispensable information. Did you notice anyone else about?" Ivy bit her lip. "Well, begging your pardon, I did meet Miss Vera in the passage. She come out of the little writing room, sort of flustered, asking if the Colonel was alone. Seems she wanted him to sign something. I said he was. She went toward the library, but I didn't see her come back. Miss Vera? Sir, a lord's niece, Milord, came down yesterday with her fiancé, Mr. Stephen Clancy. Quite. Whimsy dismissed the girl with a gentle nod and sauntered off, pondering what errand might send a fresh-complexioned young lady in quest of a volatile retiree famous for opinions on poultry and firearms. He re-emerged into the public wing to find the local constabulary had already arrived in the person of Inspector Danvers, a square-built, short-necked man whose moustache bristled in competition with the late Colonel's. Danvers was buckling on official authority like armor as Parker concluded a concise recital of facts. "Evening, my lord," he growled. "Sad business, but broken necks are mostly slips and trips. Rugs are treacherous contraptions." "So are people," Whimsy answered cheerfully. "Still, we must not libel the carpet without evidence." He produced the recovered cufflink, holding it under Danvers's nose. "Do you recognize that crest? Griffin rampant, cornucopia in the second quarter." The inspector blinked. "Can't say I do. Belong to the deceased?" "Apparently not. Colonel Calthorpe favored regimental knots. This bauble lay lonely beside the fender, perilously near immolation. Someone knelt close to the body, maybe before he was a body." Danvers made a non-committal rumble. "I shall catalogue it with the other effects." Lady Ellerton swept in at that moment, pallor disguised by an excess of pearls. "Inspector, Lord Peter, my husband begs you will interview the household somewhere less morbid. The Blue Salon, perhaps." "Very thoughtful," Whimsy murmured, "though the corpse seems past caring." He followed her stately progress, noting in passing how her shoes squeaked faintly on the parquet, a triviality stored for later use. The Blue Salon, so called in deference to its somewhat bilious tapestries, had been converted into an impromptu witnesses' queue. Chivers, insistent upon ceremony even at the gates of chaos, dispensed chairs in order of precedence. Sir Allured sat apart, twisting a signet ring whose crest matched nothing on the Colonel's cufflink. Nina Ellerton, Sir Allured's daughter-in-law, recently widowed and fashionably somnolent, lounged at the piano, idly depressing a single key as though testing the household's nerves. Whimsy began gently with Briggs, the chauffeur factotum, whose smoky tweed smelled of fresh shavings. Briggs confirmed lighting the fire at Ivy's request. The Colonel, he said, had been in one of his contrary moods, griping about drafts and other folks' shooting stance. After arranging the logs, he left by the French window to fetch kindling from the shed. On returning, he glimpsed Miss Vera in earnest conversation with her uncle near the main stair, and heard the dinner gong soon after. He did not see the Colonel alive again. "Did you notice," Whimsy asked, "if the Colonel locked the library door behind you?" "Didn't lock it, my lord, but he pushed the bolt halfway, just to hold it. He were fretting about interruptions, said something about going through his Indian papers." "Papers?" Parker interjected. "Regimental stuff, sir. He kept 'em in a metal box, green, always lugging it about." Whimsy's brows lifted. "Metal box, curious playfellow for a man reading by the fire. Thank you, Briggs." Next came Miss Vera Ellerton, slim, severe, with the restless gaze of one who expects to be contradicted. She admitted seeking the Colonel to obtain his signature on a subscription list for the county infirmary. "He could be generous when flattered," she said carefully. "I knew better than to disturb him at his books, so when Ivy told me he was being pernickety, I thought it wiser to approach just before dinner instead." She claimed to have tapped lightly. Receiving no answer, she assumed he had gone upstairs to dress. "Did you enter the room?" "No." "You are certain?" "Quite." Her eyes flicked to Sir Alured. I found my fiancée instead and forgot the matter." Whimsy allowed the point to pass. "Mr. Clancy is at present." "Changing for dinner." Her tone implied he was capable of nothing so crude as murder while in shirt-sleeves. At this juncture the doctor bustled in. Dr. Pusey, a rural physician of homely shape and harassed spectacles, he confirmed Parker's preliminary opinion. Death instant from basal skull fracture, consistent with a fall upon the fender edge. Time of death, generously estimated, between 5:45 and 6:15. Whimsy's smile tightened. The window in which the fire was lit. Parker ticked names on a notebook. So far, every soul claims to have been either lighting fires, stirring sauces, or practicing charitable extortion at the fatal instant. No quarrels reported, no screams heard, no suspicious strangers. "There is always the supernatural explanation," Nina drawled from the piano. Dinner at Ellerton Court proceeded with a brittle courtesy that might have fooled a stranger, though it could scarcely disguise the tremor running through every course. Whimsy, occupying the seat customarily reserved for the late Colonel Calthorpe, remarked that the printed menu still bore the Colonel's initials in the margin, a needless flourish, yet somehow an accusation. He tucked it into his pocket as though preserving an exhibit. Conversation steered itself along the ruts of country house propriety. Spring lambing, the squire's gout, a new bypass threatening the Roman road. Each topic skidded to a halt whenever Parker's pencil murmured across his notebook or Inspector Danvers cleared his throat. Sir Alured tried twice to toast the king. Each time Lady Ellerton corrected him to His Majesty, as if etiquette could solder a broken neck. Whimsy applied himself to consommé with an air of detached benevolence, yet his eyes roved, the table like a cat surveying a chamber full of rocking chairs. Miss Vera, seated opposite, had recovered her poise. She spoke brightly of charitable committees, but her left hand fidgeted against the stem of her glass, thumb perpetually brushing a bare wrist. At one pause she glanced down, seemed to miss something, and composed herself anew. Whimsy filed that away beside the absent cuff-link. Stephen Clancy, her fiancé, proved a neat, earnest young man of banking complexion. He answered questions about London with the reflexive caution of someone accustomed to audit trails. When Lady Ellerton wondered whether rising interest rates would discourage rural charities, Clancy assured her that prudent diversification always prevailed, then coloured faintly, as though surprised to hear himself echo a prospectus over soup. Nina, languid as a January vine, toyed with her cutlery, and ventured occasional remarks that sounded like quotations until one noticed she never named the source. "Seems a pity," she sighed while partridge was carved, "for a man to survive India and cavalry charges only to collide with his host's own fireplace." Sir Alured winced at the word own, and Chivers contrived to upset a crumb scoop, providing a metallic diversion. Pudding arrived, rosy rhubarb crowned with a brittle sugar lid. Whimsy cracked his portion gently, sending shards sliding like miniature avalanches. "Rhubarb is an optimist's fruit," he observed. "Strip the poison leaves, coax the tart stems, smother in saccharine optimism, and one may almost believe in spring. His spoon slipped beneath the crust. Doesn't quite mask the acidity, of course. Nothing ever does. After the maid cleared away, Sir Allured rose to propose that they repair to the drawing-room for coffee and await further instructions from Inspector Danvers. Wimsey shook his head amiably. "Forgive me. I promised myself a digestive stroll. Parker, will you join me?" Parker knew the tone. He excused himself, and within minutes they were pacing the terrace beneath a sky luminous with frost. Distant owls debated land rights in hollow trees. Nearer at hand, the yews craned like eavesdroppers. "Clock sticks, fire lit, cuff-link lost," Parker enumerated quietly. "Anyone might be harmless." "In isolation, yes," Wimsey replied. "But trifles rarely breed in solitude. Did you notice Miss Vera's wrist?" "Can't say I did." "Bare, no bracelet, though her engagement ring nearly blinded poor Danvers in the candlelight. I suspect a matching chain once secured father's signet, or perhaps, better, a lady's watch. A watch implying she was in the library. Or close enough to fumble with sleeves and lose a link. Yet if she lied, she risked detection at once, which suggests she believes the link unmissed by its owner, or hopes its owner is past caring." Parker pondered. Suppose Clancy borrowed the Colonel's favour. Young men will do strange things to curry goodwill from fiery uncles. That makes him the last alive with the victim. Possible, though the link bears a griffin rampant, not in the Ellerton arms nor Clancy's family, unless he hides medieval branches in the ledger. We had best verify. Meanwhile, the Colonel consulted Indian papers in a green box. Where is it now? Didn't see one on the scene. Nor did I. If a thief entered, box in hand, Calthorpe confronts him. Scuffle. Fatal fall. Thief bolts through French window, leaving link. And paraffin odorations from a hastily refueled lantern. Just so. Yet Briggs lit the grate without lamp. There was still daylight. Who needs paraffin indoors at 6, unless searching nook and cranny for something small and green? Parker exhaled steam. I'll have Danvers canvass the gardeners for odd footprints, ground soft from yesterday's rain. No heavy impressions likely, but worth a try. Wimsey halted at the library's French doors, curtains still parted. Inside, constables pottered with flash lamps. He rapped softly. Danvers unlocked and ushered them through. The room retained its sickly, warm breath, as though the hearth resented intrusion. Wimsey crossed straight to the escritoire, where Sir Allured had steadied himself earlier. The blotter bore a fresh impression, barely dry, 3 spiky initials repeated along the margin, B.H.C., then a flourish aborted by a blot. He beckoned Parker, who nodded. "Colonel drafting a letter." Or practicing a signature. Odd, given his neatness elsewhere. "Look about for foolscap." A constable produced a sheaf from the wastebasket. Half sheets torn across, words in violet ink. Parker laid them like a jigsaw on the carpet while Wimsey knelt, ignoring the stab of a fender edge that had ended the Colonel's conversation with gravity. The script, when coaxed together, read, "Further delay intolerable. If the Ellerton girl will not release funds voluntarily, I shall expose the whole arrangement. My silence is not a gift, but a purchase. I warn you this is final, and must be settled before the 13th. Parker whistled. Blackmail? Or bargaining? Ellerton girl, most likely Miss Vera, or Nina. Funds? Inheritance? Notice the date, 13th of this month. 2 days hence. Colonel pressing for money. So our gallant cavalryman cultivated leverage. A constable announced the discovery of a broken watch chain beneath the chaise longue, gilt links matching Whimsy's pocketed specimen. Whimsy accepted it with polite triumph and rejoined Parker. "That clinches Miss Vera, at least entering," Parker said. "Unless chain transferred from one wrist to another during a lively interview. Notice the clasp. Newly solid. Bad job. Suggests recent, shortening, perhaps to adapt a man's chain for a lady's wrist, or vice versa." They approached Danvers, who was inscribing evidence labels with laborious diligence. "Inspector," Whimsy said, "may I trouble you to confirm whether Sir Allure or Lady Ellerton possess jewels with a griffin crest, and whether Miss Vera's watch has developed a sudden agoraphobia?" Danvers grunted assent and delegated a constable. Parker, meanwhile, wandered to the chimney breast, sniffing delicately. "Paraffin stronger here," he declared. "I'd wager someone upended a lamp on those logs before Briggs arrived." "Precisely," Whimsy said. "He found kindling that ignited at a touch, a pyre prepared, perhaps, to destroy something explosive." "The Indian papers?" "Possibly. Metal burns poorly, but documents crisp. Colonel refuses. Tussle, lamp overturns, papers flare, fall, and fender obliges fate. But the scheme half fails. Briggs and the colonel extinguish most before flames take hold. Yet whatever remained smouldered and left perfume for my inquisitive nose." A rustle of skirts foretold Lady Ellerton's entrance. She glanced about with a conqueror's distaste. "One must settle accounts, Inspector. Is the room free for servants to tidy?" "Not yet, my lady," Danvers replied. Her eyes flickered to the hearth, then away. "I see. Do try to expedite matters. Guests will gossip if we dine beside a crime scene much longer." She withdrew. Porcelain dignity intact, Parker raised a brow. "Madame seems keen to restore domestic tranquility." "So would we all, given homicide on the carpet," Whimsy murmured. "Yet haste in housekeepers often hides embarrassments under the rug." At that moment the constable returned with a velvet jewel case. Danvers opened it. A pair of gentlemen's cufflinks, gold with griffin rampant, Sir Allured's. Below them, a space where a third might once have lain. Danvers exhaled. "Family set. Missing one." Whimsy's smile barely disturbed his features. "Indeed, and Sir Allured wore plain studs to dinner. Most men do not don family heraldry for Partridge, even less so, I fancy, after mislaying one link beside a corpse." Parker's pencil paused. "You think—" "Merely observing. Sir Allured is right-handed. Link lost from his left cuff might drop when he kneels. Say, to aid an old friend who has fallen. Yet he spoke of discovering the colonel already dead." "Did he kneel?" Parker recalled. "No. He said he stood at the escritoire." "Then why was his sleeve within spitting distance of the grate? Unless the link belongs to someone else who keeps their jewellery in Sir Allured's safe for convenience. Perhaps Nina, widowed and reverting to maiden blazon. We must ask who had access." Danvers motioned the constable back out. Whimsy wandered to the French window, unlatching it. The garden exhaled damp moss and daffodils. A path of flattened turf led toward the potting shed, where a dim lamp glowed. "Someone still at work," he said. Parker frowned. "Gardener. Briggs again, perhaps checking vehicles. Yet the glow is steady, not flicker of torch. An acetylene lamp for bicycle repairs, I'd wager." He stepped onto the terrace. "Come, a constitutional after rhubarb is salutary. They descended the stone steps and followed the path. As they neared the shed, voices drifted, Briggs's baritone and a sharper reply in Clancy's measured cadence. Whimsy slowed, signalling Parker to hush. "Told you to leave it to me," Clancy was saying. "Pressing him tonight was madness." Briggs grumbled. "He was spoiling for a row. Said he'd write Sir Allured. Made out as though you'd promised where you hadn't." A clank. Something metallic set down hard. "If the box is gone," Clancy hissed, "we're sunk. Did you search the drawers?" "Every last." Briggs sounded sullen. "Maybe he locked it elsewhere." Whimsy eased the door open. Light pooled over an elderly bicycle in mid-dismemberment, oilcloth on the floor, scattered tools. Clancy and Briggs whipped around. Clancy managed a creditable smile. "Tuning gears," he explained. "Quiet helps me think." "Most hygienic," Whimsy said. "I often dissect V12 sunbeams for stress relief. May I inquire which gears proved incompatible?" Clancy hesitated. Briggs wiped his hands on rag and muttered, "Chain kept skipping, my lord." "Chains are capricious," Whimsy agreed, glancing at a green metal deed box propped behind the wheel. "Ah, Indian color scheme. Colonel's memorabilia." Clancy moved instinctively between Whimsy and the box. "Merely cycling odds and ends. Anything we can help you with?" "On the contrary," Whimsy said lightly. "I fear I interrupt. Do carry on. Only, if you chance upon paraffin stains, I recommend soda crystals. They lift guilt better than most consciences." He withdrew with a courteous nod, Parker behind him. When they were safely beyond earshot, Parker exhaled. "Box present, so Clancy seeks it. Unaware, Briggs already moved it to the shed. Or complicit, and now arranging its disappearance. Observe, lid padlocked. We must view the contents before they vanish. I'll speak with Danvers for a search warrant first thing." He glanced at the clouded sky. "But tonight, Parker, we require alibis. Where was Sir Allured between 5:45 and 6? And where our languid Nina? Something tells me those quiet minutes hold more footfalls than a town hall dance." Inside, the grandfather clock struck 11. Its minute hand behaved faultlessly. Time, it seemed, had remembered its duty, yet only because Whimsy had nudged it back into motion. He smiled to himself. A small victory, hardly noticed, but enough to set larger wheels turning. On the terrace threshold, he paused, fingers resting on the chilled stone. Shadows of the yews stretched toward the house like accusing arms. Ellerton Court stood silent, but every window glittered with withheld confidences. He pictured the colonel's stout figure, barking for extra fire, brandishing threats on India green stationery. Someone had believed those threats intolerable. Yet wrath alone seldom arranges paraffin, clock needles, and fenders with such meticulous choreography. "Logic, Charles," he murmured. "It's all elegantly logical. Once one discovers which premise is false. Until then, we grope by borrowed light." Parker sighed. "I only hope the trail remains before morning dew blurs the lot." "It will," Whimsy said, stepping inside. "For murderers, like bad accountants, always leave a penny off somewhere. We've only to find the missing penny, and the whole ledger sings." Parker found sleep entirely theoretical. Whimsy, on the other hand, professed an early bedtime, only to emerge again at midnight, silk dressing gown flaring like an exotic moth in the corridor's candle glow. "Come along, old man. Insomnia is infinitely more profitable if shared. Danvers has planted a constable at the potting shed. Now, let's harvest a few alibis while the household clings to dreams." They started with Sir Alured, who occupied the blue four-poster in the Jacobean wing. A discreet tap produced a muffled, "Yes?" Whimsy slipped inside, leaving Parker by the door like an undertaker's shadow. Gold firelight flickered on oak panels. Sir Alured sat hunched at her escritoire in quilted robe, polishing the crest on a hunting crop, as though abrading unpalatable memories. "My lord," he said, forcing courtesy, "is this quite necessary?" "Probably not," Whimsy replied. "But necessity is overrated. Tell me, were you in the North Library at any point between 10 to 6 and 6:15? Sir Alured's hand paused. "I called on Bernard at 6:15 precisely, when the dinner gong sounded." "Yet your cufflink abandoned ship some minutes earlier." Whimsy laid the trinket on the blotter. "Mind explaining its independent adventure?" The baronet's eyes darted to the door, as though gauging Parker's distance. He sighed. "I confess I stepped in around 6 o'clock, intending to hurry the fellow along. He was alive, irritable, naturally. I leaned on the fender to warm my hands. Must have dislodged the link. Bernard waved me off, muttered about confounded mathematics, and locked something in that green tin box of his. Did you see the box after that?" "No. I left, heard the gong, changed my coat." His voice thickened. "I regret not staying. Perhaps—" "Regret is an uncooperative witness," Whimsy said gently. "Thank you." He pocketed the link and departed before further explanations erupted. Next they roused Nina, ensconced in the modern guest suite with pale lamps and an Art Deco vanity. She opened the door in a cloud of bas à Versailles and disdain, kimono loosely belted. "You collect confessions like postcards, Lord Peter." "Only the picture postcard sort," he said, crossing to the window. "Were you acquainted with the Colonel's Indian campaigns?" "Only his stories, Bangalore this, Lahore that, forever brandishing relics like party favours." She yawned artistically. "Is that why you disturb my beauty sleep?" "Partly. Also because blackmailers often target the recently bereaved. Did Calthorpe hold something over you?" Her mascaraed lids did not flicker, but her fingers tightened on the sash. "Over me?" "Goodness, no. My late husband's peccadilloes were public sport long before Bernard discovered them." Her brittle laugh snapped. "I'm quite bankrupt of secrets, Lord Peter. Do try Vera next door. She's stuffed with them." Whimsy bowed out. "One always consults the oracle, madam." As the door closed, Nina's husky murmur floated after them. "Do hurry. Some of us kill only on 8 hours' rest." Vera's room lay at the far end, candle still guttering in the corridor. She answered in nightgown and overcoat, cheeks blotched from recent tears. "Has something happened?" "Not yet," Whimsy said, "which is why we're intervening." He noticed her bare wrist again. "Mislaid a watch," she glanced down, colouring. "Snapped its chain earlier. I misplaced it." "Where?" "In the Green Baize corridor, I think. It must have fallen," her voice quavered. Is Uncle Bernard truly murdered?" "That remains to be proved," Whimsy replied. "But we did recover torn pages in his hand, demanding money from an Ellerton girl. Were you the intended beneficiary, or payer?" "I don't know what you mean," she retreated, hand gripping the doorframe. "Uncle Bernard lent Papa money years ago, perhaps." "Your father died insolvent," Whimsy supplied. "Colonel Calthorpe may have pressed you to redeem the debt using your marriage settlement, which Sir Alured controls until you wed." Tears started afresh. "He said he'd ruin Papa's reputation, claim it was embezzlement. He wanted 5,000 by the 13th. And you could not raise it without Sir Alured's consent. She shook silently. Thank you, Miss Vera. Sleep if you can. The truth, like dawn, is inevitable if less becoming. They returned to Whimsy's room, where the detective extracted a fountain pen and began charting times upon hotel notepaper. Allur'd admits presence at 6. Briggs leaves at 5 to 6. Vera perhaps arrives moments later. Chain breaks. Watch gone. Calthorpe locks box. Burns. Papers. Tussle ensues. Cause unclear. Our fatal minute lies between Briggs's exit and Allured's re-entry. As narrow as that, Parker asked, assuming Allured speaks true. If not, the window widens. Notice, however, that paraffin suggests deliberate ignition. Someone hoped the fire would consume incriminating documents before supper. Bernard resists. Blow against fender. Silence. Parker frowned. What of Clancy? He searched the shed as if unaware the box already there. Which might indicate innocence, or deep play. Suppose he met Bernard, argued, struck him, hid the box in shed, then pretended to hunt it with Briggs. But Briggs witnessed the quarrel only after death. Precisely. The chronology splinters. We lack the watch, and we lack the green box's contents. Until we secure both, speculation is treacherous. He dropped the pen. Still, I think our murderer tampered with the grandfather clock to secure an alibi. Freeze time at 23 past, then reset later. That trick demands knowledge of the clock's weakness. Who besides Chivers? Any servant accustomed to slamming that baize door, Parker mused, but also any family member observing Chivers's nightly tap. Indeed, Whimsy blew out the candle. We shall examine the clock mechanism at dawn. He was as good as his word. By 7 they stood in the long corridor, dew chill leaking under the door. Whimsy opened the clock case, exposing brass gears dulled by age and oil. He motioned Parker to slam the baize door. The vibration jarred the pallet fork, causing the escapement to stall. Child's play, he said. Set the hands, stop the pendulum, and your alibi is frozen. But one needs privacy to tamper, Parker observed. True, and reason to blur the interval when one visited the library. He closed the case. Breakfast assembled a pallid company around kedgeree and coffee. Inspector Danvers arrived, bearing a magistrate's authority to open the green tin box. Clancy paled, but expressed relief. Vera kept her eyes on her porridge. Sir Allur'd muttered about invasion of property rights. Nina appeared fashionably late, claiming migraines. They convened in the shed, where the constable stood guard. Danvers produced bolt cutters. The padlock surrendered with a crack. Inside lay a tangle of notebooks, sepia photographs, and a heavy calico pouch. Whimsy tipped the pouch. Golden sovereigns spilled, stamped 1917. Remittances from India, he surmised. Parker leafed the notebooks, meticulous accounts of mess expenses, debt markers, including one neatly ruled column labelled Ellerton, 46 Tonkti. Interest on an old loan, Whimsy said. But see this final entry, 10 days ago. Threaten public disclosure if not settled by 13th. Calthorpe intended blackmail. Clancy drew breath. He told Vera he would ruin us. I tried. To reason last night, Briggs overheard. Colonel lost his temper, struck at me. I left him alive, I swear. Leaving what time? 5 to 6. Briggs came in with logs. I went to wash up. Brig, which door? The French window. Whimsy nodded. Your sleeve, remarkably clean for such a scuffle. Clancy flushed. I changed at once. Into dinner clothes, yes. But the linen you wore then should show ash or paraffin. Produce it, please." He signalled a constable. Clancy hesitated, then yielded the shirt from his valise. Cuff singed, smudged with soot. A single button, Griffin stamped, dangled by thread. Sir Allure stared. "That belongs to the family set. How did you— "Oh!" "I borrowed them when my studs snapped," Clancy muttered. "Chivers said I might." "Chivers says many things," Whimsy cut in. So, Clancy confronted Calthorpe, tore his cuff, singed shirt, fled. Briggs lights fire, leaves. Vera arrives, pleads, chain breaks. Perhaps she douses flames with decanter water, explains weak scorch marks. Colonel rages, but not yet dead. Allured enters, warms hands. Link drops. Colonel threatens full disclosure. Baronet, desperate to shield family honour, strikes, pushes, or perhaps Colonel trips whilst grappling. Either way, Allured sees opportunity. Resets clock, bolts door, exits by servant corridor, dresses, returns to discover corpse. Silence hung like cobweb. Sir Allured's face worked. He gripped the crop until knuckles blanched. "Logical. Too logical. Except I did not kill him." Then who benefited most from his silence? Whimsy's gaze drifted to Nina, leaning languidly against the doorpost. "A widow fearing scandal about her late husband's gambling, or a niece fearing ruination. Yet only one among you knew the clock's foible, and commanded the household enough to slam that baize door unremarked." He inclined his head. "Lady Ellerton?" Every eye swiveled. Nina gave a tiny, delighted laugh. "My dear Peter, you've implicated the lot and landed on the wrong fish. I never handle that provincial clock." "No, you have others to do it. Ivy testified she met you leaving the writing room at 6. A maid will slam doors with impunity if her mistress scolds her for drafts." Vera gasped. "Aunt Nina, you used me." Nina's smile sharpened. "Bernard had letters, indecent drivel from my late husband. He wanted payment. I indulged him with promises, but he pressed too far. When Stephen failed," she flicked a glance of contempt, "I secured my future myself." Danvers stepped forward. "Lady Ellerton, are you confessing?" "Confessing? I merely observe that Bernard's clumsiness astonished us all." She straightened. "But I dare say Scotland Yard prefers tidy stories. If one must be supplied." The sentence trailed as Whimsy produced a handkerchief, holding it to the singed cuff of Clancy's shirt. A smear of lamp oil bloomed. "Paraffin, madam, bears a cheap perfume. Fowler's Tractor brand, used only on servants' lamps and kept in the still-room cupboard under your key. Fingerprints on the tin will speak loudly." For the first time, Nina's composure faltered, her eyes iced over. "You're a vulgar little ferret, Lord Peter." "Better ferret than stoat," he murmured. Danvers signalled the constable. Nina allowed herself to be escorted toward the house, spine unbending. Sir Allure sagged, aging a decade. God help us. It was all to protect the family name. Whimsy laid a hand on his shoulder. "Names survive, Sir Allure. It's people who perish. Be kind to your niece. She'll need sense more than settlements now." As the party dispersed, Parker exhaled. "You traced the paraffin tin earlier." "Spotted its absence on my nocturnal ramble. Cupboard left ajar." Whimsy shrugged. "A whiff of tractor fuel among heliotrope is as telling as mustard on a silver salver." The rest followed like soldiers on parade. They strolled back toward the house. "What becomes of Ellerton Court?" Parker asked. "A little notoriety, a footnote in The Times, and a hushed auction, perhaps. But spring will still rattle the yews, clocks will still stick at capricious moments, and fires will doubtless be lit before supper, for comfort, not conspiracy. Life's continuity, Charles, depends on our capacity to overlook ash on the hearth. Parker glanced at his friend. And your comfort? Wimsey smiled, thin and distant. I shall find it in a decent cup of coffee. Also, he patted his pocket watch, in knowing that, after all, time can be persuaded to tell the truth, provided someone bothers to listen when it stops. Inspector Danvers's triumphant bustle filled the courtyard, as Lady Nina disappeared into the police car. But Wimsey watched the departing vehicle with a mild frown, as though listening for a note that refused to resolve. The baronet, white and shaken, retreated indoors, clutching Parker's arm for moral equilibrium, while Miss Vera, face half-veiled by her cloche, slipped away toward the rose garden. Only the caw of rooks overhead acknowledged the drama's latest curtain. Parker returned after a minute, rubbing the morning chill from his knuckles. Well, she had opportunity, a motive in those letters, and paraffin on the tin. Even her manner reeked of guilty relief once she thought the box destroyed. Undeniable, Wimsey conceded, yet his gaze remained on the drive's empty sweep. Still, I dislike puzzles that click together before one has properly shuffled the pieces. They so often conceal a cog turned the wrong way round. Parker made the noise of a man humoring an old friend. Anything specific? Only that our chronology, for all its elegance, leaves a small hole you could thread a noose through. Remember the grandfather clock. Whoever froze it knew it would be tapped into life at dinner. Lady Nina rarely strays the servants' hall, and Ivy swears her mistress hates that vulgar clang. Ivy's own testimony, Nina scolding drafts, could she have invented it under duress? She's young, impressionable, Parker said slowly, and Nina has her by the purse strings. Yet the paraffin could have been staged. A willing accomplice oils a tin, leaves it for the constables, or perhaps fingerprints are cousin to telepathy. They tell us who touched an object, not why. He turned on his heel. Come, Sir Allured is due a lucid talk. Family skeletons seldom rest quietly, once rattled. They found the master of Ellerton Court hunched beneath the bay window of the morning room, stirring a cup that must once have contained coffee. Sunlight, brittle and unseasonable, picked out every threadbare patch in his tweed. He looked up like a man interrupted in consultation with his own ghost. Lord Peter, I cannot believe it. Nina, a murderess. The question had the air of something recited to see whether it might become true. Belief is taxation on certainty, Sir Allured. I prefer receipts. We are missing one. Wimsey lowered himself to the spindly Hepplewhite opposite. Your niece's watch has not been recovered, nor the letters Colonel Calthorpe used for leverage. If Nina schemed alone, she would hardly risk leaving either unaccounted. Moreover, the watch chain was found inside the library, but the watch itself has gulped sea air. Parker closed the door. Is there any second safe, sir? Or a hiding place Calthorpe might favour? Only the muniments room in the west turret, disused since the Great War. Bernard teased me yesterday about locking away his memoirs of empire there, but I thought it one of his barbs. Wimsey's eyebrows rose. We shall examine it. And, Sir Allured, one further point. Did you give Mr. Clancy permission to borrow those griffin links? The colour ebbed from the older man's cheeks. Certainly not. Chivers is custodian of household plate. He would never. Yet Clancy tells a story both plausible and convenient. Perhaps you might question the butler quietly while Parker and I explore the turret. The muniments room lay at the far end of a spiral, desperate for retirement, its oak door furry with dust. A brass key protruded from the lock. Whimsy expelled a whistle. Unlocked treasure house of dynastic proofs. Either Sir Allured grows careless, or someone wanted easy ingress. He pushed. Hinges groaned like stage machinery. Inside, parchment chests and deed coffers formed tottering colonnades beneath cobweb trusses. Sun stabbed through arrow slits, trapping motes in private orbits. Parker sneezed. Whimsy advanced, scanning floorboards for fresh scuffs. Near the central coffer lay a smear of grey wax, crushed almost flat. "A candle stub," Parker said, stooping. "Soft, recently melted. Someone read here by candlelight last night." And extinguished hastily, losing wax. Whimsy opened the coffer. Within, sealed packets of 17th-century rent rolls slept untouched. He closed it, moved to a writing desk shoved under a slit window. There lay a crumpled wad of linen, Vera's missing watch wrapped in a blood-flecked handkerchief. Parker stared. That handkerchief is monogrammed B.H.C., Calthorpe himself, blood presumably from his nose when he fell. "Or from a blow across the face earlier," Whimsy murmured. He unwound the cloth, the watch case dented, hands stopped at 6:01. "Ivy's estimate of the chain's breakage," he added softly. "Whoever pocketed it had exactly the window we suspected." The watch bore fine scratches around the keyhole. Parker produced his magnifier. "Somebody tried to pick it open." "Or lock something inside." Whimsy pressed the catch. Lids sprang, revealing not works and springs, but a square of rolled vellum jammed where movement should be. An antique lease, smaller than a calling card. Across the front, Calthorpe's jittery scrawl. Her proof: destroy if unpaid. "Bernard replaced the watchworks," Parker said, fascinated. "No wonder he treasured it. Blackmail portable." "And someone relieved him of it after the fall. Why hide it here, unless they couldn't risk disposal elsewhere?" Whimsy straightened. "My dear Charles, we stare at the ledger's missing penny." They descended in silence, minds racing. In the hall, a subdued Ivy waited, wringing her apron. "Beg pardon, my lord, but Mr. Clancy's packing the big car. Says Sir Allured gave him leave to fetch Miss Vera to the doctor." "Indeed?" Whimsy flashed Parker a look. "Pray ask him to delay. I wish to commend his sense of duty." The Daimler stood outside, bonnet already rumbling. Clancy, in tweed cap, turned as they approached, features set in polite impatience. "Miss Vera's nerves are shattered. I must get her clear of this ghastly business." "Commendable chivalry," Whimsy said, "though I fear you mislaid a keepsake." He held out the dented watch. Clancy recoiled. "What? Where did you—" "In the turret, conveniently wrapped in bloody linen. Your handiwork?" Clancy's eyes flicked past them toward the door. "I haven't been near that oubliette." "Then our blackmailer returned from the dead," Parker suggested dryly. "Followed the labyrinth, stashed his leverage, and lay down by the fender for a nap." The young man swallowed. "Look here. Bernard bullied everyone. He would have ruined Vera, ruined us both. I tried to buy time, yes, but I never struck him. Ask Briggs." "We did," Whimsy replied. "He heard raised voices, saw you leave seething, shirt smeared with soot, cuff hanging by a thread. Yet the blow that felled Calthorpe came from someone wearing gloves, small gloves at that, if the bruise on his jaw lines up with a ring less than a quarter-inch." Clancy flinched. "Gloves? Nina's?" "More likely Vera's," Whimsy said quietly. Her riding gloves vanished after luncheon, replaced by lace at table. I found their empty box in her wardrobe. Parker caught his breath. Then Vera took the watch, hid it. Exactly. She arrived just after Briggs left, begged mercy, perhaps seized the watch in panic when tempers flared. Bernard grabbed her wrist. Chain snapped. She fled, hid proof in turret, returned to change, leaving Colonel very much alive, if enraged. That's why the watch hands stop at 6:01, the instant of her struggle, not of his death. Clancy's shoulders sagged as though the engine weight had shifted onto him. Then, my dear girl is innocent. Innocent of murder, perhaps, said Wimsey. But Calthorpe died later, and Lady Nina's alibi has sprung a leak. Ivy now admits Nina never left the writing room at 6. She came along the baize door 5 minutes after Vera's flight, carrying a small lamp. He touched Clancy's sleeve. Drive nowhere just yet, Mr. Clancy. Ellerton Court may endure one scandal. It will not survive an elopement. Inside, Wimsey found Danvers in grim communion with Sir Alured and Chivers. The butler, under gentle pressure, confessed that the family cufflinks had been accessible to anyone requesting them. Miss Vera, that afternoon, borrowed the set as a surprise for her fiancé. Danvers massaged his temples. So the link by the hearth came off Clancy's borrowed sleeve. But the paraffin tin? Also borrowed, Wimsey replied. Fingertips of 3 different sizes on its neck, Inspector. Nina's, Vera's, and Clancy's. All 3 meddled with our scene at stages. Clancy in anger, Vera in fear, Nina in calculation. She alone administered the fatal push, but disguised it among a confusion of half-truths. Sir Alured groaned. My household is a serpent pit. Only ordinary human desperation, Sir Alured. One threat breeds another, until violence appears the simplest accountancy. Wimsey lifted the watch. Calthorpe's hold over you all lay in 4 square inches of vellum. Had he chosen frankness over extortion, he might have dined in peace. Danvers straightened, decision forming. I shall fetch Lady Nina back, and you, Lord Peter, will you testify to these deductions? With pleasure, though nothing I add will alter the evidence. Still, I recommend retrieving Vera from the rose garden before rumour does. Briggs can drive her and Clancy to the inn until you finish. As the inspector strode away, Parker exhaled. Any sympathy for Nina? Some, Wimsey admitted. She feared ruin, seized the shortest path, and ensured her prop was paraffin, cheapest, dirtiest symbol of the servant world she thought beneath her. In the end, it betrayed her class far more than fingerprints. He pocketed his monocle. Let us find Miss Vera. A girl's future is delicate as a watch spring, and we have wound it rather tight. They discovered Vera beside the sundial, stare fixed on the horizon where the police car had vanished. The rust-streaked dial showed noon, though it was barely 10. Time, in this garden as in corridors, insisted on its own lies. Parker approached gently. She started, then steadied at the sight of Clancy hurrying behind. It isn't over, she whispered. Wimsey shook his head. Nearly. Your aunt will answer further questions, but I believe you and Mr. Clancy need only truth to clear the rest. The watch is safe. He placed it in her hand. She flinched, then clutched it like a hot coal. Uncle's blood, she murmured. Not yours, Wimsey corrected softly. And not Stephen's. Look after each other. Regrettably, the one prescription no doctor can write. Clancy drew her close. Thank you, Lord Peter. Wimsey tipped his hat. The gratitude belongs to chronology. I merely listen when clocks misbehave." He turned toward the house, where the yews cast bars across the gravel, like the shadow of an unraised portcullis. Murder, he reflected, may slam one door, but it unlatches a dozen lesser cupboards in passing, each filled with its own domestic disarray. One tidied them as best one could, promised oneself a quiet pipe, and wondered, as always, how many more fires would be lit before supper, in a world determined never quite to keep warm, without first charring a little innocence. Whimsy left the pair by the sundial and walked back toward the house, Parker matching his stride. The lawn still carried the imprint of the police car's tires, narrow ruts leading nowhere, and the same thought seemed to tug at both men. The ground looked too soft, the case too firm. Inside, damp air drifted through the hall. Someone had opened the front door, and voices rose from the direction of the library. They entered to find Inspector Danvers just returned, frustration stiffening the set of his shoulders. "She's halfway to the county line," he growled. "The constable swears he watched her into your parlour, sir, but Nina must have slipped out by the garden passage. Driver saw nothing." Whimsy tipped back his head until the gold-tooled ceiling book spines blurred. "Fugitives always confirm a weak conclusion, Inspector. They seldom improve it. Better we ask why she ran now, when the formal charge was still unpenned." He moved to the hearth, where the last of the embers whispered white dust across the grate. "This room keeps lending tricks to whoever happens to need them. We ought to stop interviewing it while its loyalties waver." Sir Allure appeared in the doorway, breathing hard from the staircase. "Is it true? Nina gone? God help us, she'll fling herself in the river." "Possibly," Whimsy said, "though the Wye lies 10 miles east, and Nina dislikes country mud. A creature of comfort chooses a quick train rather than a slow current." His attention snagged on something white protruding from the Persian rug's fringe, a folded paper only just visible where earlier none had shown. He stooped and drew it free, a page torn from Calthorpe's ledger, the ink blurred as those licked by steam. Parker leaned over. "Left here or planted?" "Left, but by whom?" Whimsy unfolded it, the Colonel's looping hand, a fragment torn across a sentence. "Names entrusted for insurance should calamity befall," and so forth. "Our missing letters are referenced explicitly." He scanned the rest. "Signature initialed, time stamped 5:45. Curious he would date a private memo to himself." Danvers read over Whimsy's shoulder. "She must have returned, searched, and dropped the scrap. Whoever took the tin box had this page tucked in a hurry. Nina had no chance. She was under escort. Therefore someone else entered after we left." He tapped the rug. "The constable on duty outside swears no one came through the main door. We must consider windows again." Before response could form, an urgent thudding raced along the corridor. Ivy burst in, cheeks ashen. "Mr. Briggs, sir, at the stable. He's bleeding terrible." They followed her at a run, boots slipping on dew-slick flagstones. The stable yard looked hushed, fresh straw glimmering in sun shafts. Briggs sat propped against the tackroom wall, hand pressed to his scalp, where blood matted greying hair. A constable knelt beside him, attempting bandages with a handkerchief and a length of bridle. "Attacked from behind," Briggs muttered, voice thick. "Didn't see him. Went to fetch the Colonel's kit from the Daimler. Someone clouted me." Parker crouched. "What kit?" "Indian chest. Danvers took it, put it in evidence store. But Sir said the magistrate wanted the uniforms too. Thought it sensible to keep all together. Box was gone when I woke. Danvers swore. The evidence room's locked, only I held a key. Whimsy's gaze drifted to the carriage shed, door ajar, wheel tracks in fresh gravel, a faint whiff of petrol. Someone used the house key, while the yard constable fussed over tires. Clancy? But he was with Vera. Nina fled through this yard, perhaps struck Briggs to delay pursuit, lifted the box, and drove off. Too neat, Parker muttered. Why fetch the box after running if the police already traced things to her? Because the letters inside still mattered. To someone else, she might salvage a bargain or shield a partner. Whimsy knelt by Briggs. Did your attacker wear gloves? Think so. Felt leather. Smell of sandalwood. Sandalwood? Parker echoed. Clancy's aftershave. More likely Sir Alured's cigar case. He keeps emery wood impregnated with sandal oils. But Sir Alured was in the hall when we arrived. Whimsy rose, wiping straw from his knees. Time, Charles, is again unfaithful. Let's confirm positions, he beckoned Ivy. Who saw Sir Alured since we left him? Ladyship's maid met him on the main stair. Milord, 10:15. He asked for smelling salts. 10 past or quarter? Quarter, sir. Clock just chimed. Her certainty wavered. Or nearly. Whimsy glanced at the stable clock. Hands pointed to 10:38. The bell had rusted silent years ago. No chime could be heard here, he said softly, and a corridor clock may once again have had its palsy encouraged. Our mischief-maker likes familiar tools. A search of Sir Alured's study yielded an empty space on the high shelf where his cigar case usually lived. The butler, summoned, confirmed its absence. On the blotter lay a smudge of cigar ash mixed with dried paraffin crystals, the sort found on lamp wicks. Whimsy studied this silently, then pocketed the stray ash between watch-glass slides. Danvers appeared with news. A village boy cycling the back lane had seen a cream Vauxhall speeding east, lady driving, hat like a dead pheasant. Whimsy smothered a grim smile. Nina's taste in millinery was as subtle as field artillery. The path skirted the old canal before joining the Hereford Road, a route seldom patrolled. He and Danvers set off in the inspector's Wolseley, with Parker squeezed into the rear, beside a shotgun the constabulary kept for vermin. Dust rose behind them along hawthorn hedges still beaded with last night's rain. 5 miles on, they found the Vauxhall abandoned at a gate leading on to water meadows. One door gaped. On the seat sat the colonel's green box, lid ripped open, emptied. Inside, a single envelope remained, addressed in Calthorpe's hand, to Miss V. Ellerton, to be opened only in extremity. The wax seal hung intact. Danvers swore again. She sifted the letters, kept what damned her, discarded Vera's. Or vice versa. Whimsy lifted the envelope, weighing possibilities. If Nina fled with compromising letters, why leave the box? If Sir Alured staged her flight, why abandon so clumsily? Unless there were 2 thieves, one after the letters, another after the sovereigns. Parker nudged an oil patch beneath the chassis, bright and unnatural among meadow mud. Fuel draining. She never intended to drive far. Perhaps a rendezvous? Beyond the gate, cattle tracks ran toward the canal. They followed, boots sucking in black loam, until reeds rose high and rustling. In the narrow towpath, they discovered the cigar case, oak veneer shattered, the cigars half charred. Near it lay Lady Nina's hat, crushed flat, feathers sodden in canal water. But no body floated among the lilies. A constable found footprints, 2 sets, 1 lighter, high-heeled, the other heavier, broader, accompanied by smears where a box had been dragged. The tracks dwindled into nettles, then met fresh bicycle treads, angled back toward the village lane. Someone collected her, Parker deduced. Briggs told us Nina's perfume was heliotrope, to mask paraffin. But sandalwood came with the assailant. Could Sir Allure have driven a cycle here, met Nina, staged her vanishing, then bicycled home? But the time? He could, if the corridor clock gave him 20-odd minutes of ghost time, Whimsy said. Still, why knock Briggs senseless? Allure cares for his people. He'd sooner invent paperwork. He studied the crushed hat, noticing a curl of ribbon snagged on an iron mooring ring. A second ribbon of identical shade, drifting downstream, bore a pin with tiny griffin head, the mate to the lost cufflink. They returned to the Wolseley in thoughtful silence, every mile allowing dust to settle on one hypothesis and breed another. Back at Ellerton Court, the atmosphere felt evacuated, as though one missing woman had siphoned air from every corridor. Vera waited in the library, Clancy at her side, pale but resolute. Whimsy placed the sealed envelope before her. Your uncle meant you to open this only if worst befell. Today qualifies. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax. Inside lay a short note and a savings bank book, showing £4,600 in her name, deposited gradually over 3 years. Calthorpe's note explained that the money came from the sale of a diamond the family had once mislaid. He had replaced it anonymously, ashamed of the earlier loan's burden. The note ended, "Debt repaid. Forgive a foolish old dragoon his theatrics." Vera's tears fell onto the ledger. Clancy crushed her fingers. Parker swore softly in amazement. Danvers removed his helmet and sat. Whimsy alone seemed unsurprised. He was staging one last lesson in frugality, he said. Pressure, negotiation, then a sudden miracle of solvency. She would value the gift more for its cost in nerves. But someone misconstrued the performance. He turned to Danvers. The letters Nina feared may never have existed. She believed Calthorpe capable of publishing her late husband's gambling vouchers, yet Bernard's only weapon was pretense. When he threatened to expose, he meant to expose his own generosity. Too late to correct the misunderstanding. Danvers rubbed eyes. And whoever met Nina at the canal still holds her, or perhaps already rid of her. Whimsy's voice chilled. Fetch divers at once, but before that, Inspector, seal Sir Allured's study. Seize his clothing for traces of reed pollen and bicycle grease, and post a man at the station. If Nina reaches a train alive, she will travel with a man who smells of saddle soap and fresh varnish. Sir Allured, located in the morning room, looked smaller than he had hours before, as though the absence of one compact hat had subtracted a portion of his mass. He rose when they entered, steadied by Chivers. Whimsy spoke gently. You left the house by the garden passage at 10:10, returned at 10:35, and reset the corridor clock to create an alibi. You carried your cigar case, emptied the paraffin inside Calthorpe's ash to imitate Nina's scent, and met her by arrangement at the canal. Why? Sir Allured's hand strayed to his throat. To pay her off, she threatened to speak about my manipulation of Vera's funds. I advanced small sums to cover estate expenses, recorded them as interest on her inheritance. Only temporary, you see, but in black and white it looks embezzlement. The word escaped like air from a slit tire. Nina discovered the ledgers and wanted security in case you pressed charges. So you brought her the sovereigns. Yes, only when she saw the balance, she laughed, called it pittance. We quarrelled. I never struck her. She stepped back, lost footing, fell into the weeds, the canal shelves steeply there. His gaze drifted to the window, suddenly remote. I reached for her hat. Only the hat. Parker moved, but Whimsy lifted a hand. Is she alive? I don't know. She never surfaced. The water is black, full of snags. His voice cracked. I couldn't. Chivers will confirm. I came straight in. But Briggs... You silenced Briggs to delay alarm, Whimsy finished. Then staged a theft to shift suspicion wholly onto Nina. Dead or vanished, she would take the letters with her. He exhaled. Yet the letters are myth, Sir Allured. The only crime left is concealment. Danvers stepped forward, cuffs ready, but compassion plain. I must ask you to accompany me, sir. Sir Allured nodded once, like a man acknowledging the final shot at a masked ball. As they left, Chivers touched Whimsy's sleeve. My lord, should they find nothing? Then memory will supply what mud withholds, Whimsy answered, and perhaps, in time, prove kinder than truth. Evening found Whimsy and Parker standing once more by the hearth, whose dull ash had ignited so much flame. The house breathed grief, but also, paradoxically, a strange relief. It could begin the slow mouldering into legend. Now that every secret lay uprooted, Parker broke the silence. Will Vera ever know Calthorpe meant kindness? Likely she will, and that will hurt worse than cruelty. But she will also know the estate is hers untainted, and that knowledge may yet coax spring green out of ashes. Whimsy turned the monocle between finger and thumb, catching lamplight. You see, Charles, fires do far more than warm. They reveal, they temper, and occasionally they forge. Ellerton Court has had its forging. The next fire, I fancy, will be lit in a grate, free from debt and fear. He slipped the glass away and smiled a worn smile. And when it is, may it blaze purely, long enough to toast a kipper, but never again to scorch a conscience. The April dusk did not linger long enough for the divers to finish their work, so acetylene lamps bobbed on the canal like baleful will-o'-the-wisps, while Whimsy and Parker paced the towpath, counting every nervous splash. Rain threatened again, and the air tasted of damp iron. Dredging chains clinked like distant cavalry. Presently, Constable Elmsford hauled himself onto the bank, dripping weedy water from his helmet brim. Nothing yet, my lord. Bottom's a lattice of roots. Give us daylight and a grapnel, maybe. Whimsy thanked him with a nod that conveyed both patience and misgiving. He stooped to examine the churned mud, where Nina's footprints had ended. The heavier companion prints, not after all Sir Allured's city shoe, but a half-size larger and square at the toe, showed clear impressions of hobnails. Sir Allured's custom bootmaker scorns such vulgarities, he murmured. Our sandalwood friend hired cheaper leather, or borrowed it. He lifted an object the dredgers had earlier tossed aside as scrap, a flattened brass ferrule, once capping the end of a short walking cane. Barely visible beneath verdigris, a griffin crest glimmered. Parker whistled low. Another griffin! The Ellerton heraldry is breeding like rabbits. Heraldry seldom breeds without heralds, Whimsy replied, pocketing the ferrule as though it were a chit for a particularly risky game. Consider, the cufflink, the hatpin, now a cane tip. A herald's work is to forge alliances, marriage, adoption, bastard branches. Whose griffin is this? Before Parker could answer, a constable hurried up the towpath, breath steaming. "Message from the station, sir. Lady Ellerton's riding coat found at Buscott Halt, handed in by a porter. No ticket stubs, but the London train passed 10 minutes before." "So she may yet be alive, trading hedges for hedges," Parker said. "Or someone wants us to believe so," Wimsey cautioned. "Mark the coat as evidence. Ask the railway men whether a woman actually boarded or merely left luggage as bait." He straightened, brushing mud from his cuffs. "Meanwhile, the house still hums. A family hive rarely quiets while drones skirmish." They arrived back at Ellerton Court near midnight, lanterns veiled, and constables posted like chess pawns at every egress. Through the rain-streaked vestibule glass, Wimsey saw Vera seated in the drawing-room, head bowed over the savings book, Clancy hovering, silent, protective, stricken. Chivers crossed the threshold carrying a tray he hadn't fetched in 2 decades, cocoa in battered tin mugs, not porcelain, for such a night called for plebeian steadiness rather than fragile ceremony. As Wimsey shed his coat, Chivers paused. "Apologies, my lord, but a gentleman waits in the gun-room, unannounced. He would not give a name, said only that Lord Peter would hear him. Introduce us to our midnight tale-bearer." Wimsey followed the butler across the unlit parlour, Parker at his shoulder. The gun-room smelled of oiled walnut and scoured brass. Beyond the racks, a lamp revealed the stooping figure of an elderly chaplain in clerical grey, water seeping from his hat-brim onto the goatskin mat. Tall, spare, he resembled a walking umbrella forgotten in a pew. Chivers murmured his title. "The Reverend Mr. Selwyn, Parish of St. Agatha's, Buscott," and withdrew. The old man wasted no politeness. "I was curate here decades ago," he began, voice like dry wind in the organ loft. "Sir Alured has erred, yes, but he was not with Nina at the canal. I saw the true companion cycling hell for leather toward the meadow at 10:15, and it was not the baronet. It was Briggs." He produced a soggy envelope. "This came in the alms box tonight. No sender. I thought best to bring it." Inside lay 2 items, a pawn ticket for a Birmingham jeweller, pledged yesterday, description lady's diamond ring, and a torn page from Colonel Calthorpe's riding diary, scribbled over in pencil. "Meeting tonight, usual place." B. Beneath, a different hand had added, "Money not enough. Proof or payment," Parker read, jaw tightening. Briggs again. The chauffeur's name keeps bobbing up like a bad cork. Diamond ring. Could be Nina's, or one she intended to raise cash on. "Or Vera's," Wimsey added. "Nina may have borrowed it for bargaining." He thanked the vicar, promised to alert Danvers, and dismissed him with brandy and a dry cloak. When the door closed, Parker exhaled. Briggs drives everybody's errands, knows every bolt hole, and has old scores with the colonel. He's also handy with paraffin. "And owns hobnailed boots," Wimsey said. "Remember the square toe prints. If Briggs knocked Alured's plan sideways, that explains Alured's confusion and later desperation." They found Inspector Danvers in the improvised evidence room, cataloguing Sir Alured's boots. Wimsey placed the ferrule on the table, then the pawn ticket. Danvers stared, moustache bristling like a disturbed hedgehog. "So Briggs meets Nina, takes the letters, leaves her coat to stage a rail escape, drags the sovereigns off." Possibly, but Nina's fate still clouded. She could be hostage or worse. Briggs has motive enough. Calthorpe's bullying, blackmail money, perhaps secret liaison. The ring suggests a lover or an accomplice in debt. Wimsey tapped the catalogue. "May we interview our injured coachman properly?" Briggs lay under blankets in the surgery, scalp stitched, eyes glassy with laudanum, yet stubborn. At the sight of Whimsy, he stiffened. "Told the constable. I never hurt her ladyship. She was kind to me, used to give me books for my nephew." "What happened after the quarrel in the shed?" Whimsy asked. The man's gaze slid sideways. "I went to wind the stable clock. Fell asleep. That's all." "Wind clocks with a cosh in your pocket?" Parker produced the brass ferrule. "Your walking cane, missing its foot." Recognition flickered. Briggs closed his eyes. Whimsy lowered his voice. "If Nina is alive, there is mercy yet. If not, the river will speak soon, and the rope after. Help us while truth costs less than silence." Minutes ticked. At last Briggs whispered, "She begged me to fetch the old canoe from the boathouse. Planned to drift south to Gloucester, meet a solicitor friend. Said she'd pay me from the colonel's hoard. I took the cane for balance, helped her push off. Then someone clouted me. Didn't see who. Must have stolen the box after I dropped." "Did she speak of letters?" "Only the one she'd written. Confession of estate misdeeds," she said, "to be posted if Sir Allured betrayed her. Told me to give it direct to the Times if anything went foul." Whimsy straightened. So Nina carried a confession, not blackmail. The thief feared it. He beckoned Parker out. "Find that canoe before dawn. Tidal locks will swallow it by noon. I'll puzzle the thief who canes a coachman and plants coats." They split forces. Parker commandeered men to sweep the southern reaches. Whimsy returned to the library, passing Vera asleep in a wing chair, hand clasped round her wrist where the broken chain had been. The tall case clock, now unmolested, chimed 2. He opened the face, studied the mechanism again, then noticed fresh grease on the pendulum bob, faint but recent, smelling not of machine oil, but of saddle soap like the bicycle he had seen earlier. And who had worked that bicycle? Clancy, the tidy fiancé, whose finances rested on Ellerton goodwill, who borrowed heraldic studs, who alone had an alibi corroborated only by Vera's distracted word. Whimsy moved softly to the writing desk, where Clancy had earlier jotted telegram drafts to his bank. The blotter revealed indentations. Taking a sheet, he shaded lightly with graphite. "Briggs arranged, ferrule planted. Have sovereigns. Meet 9 a.m. Old Quarry Road." The signature was a single flourish. S.C. Clancy sprang up as Whimsy entered the billiard room. "Any news?" he asked. His voice held eager solicitude, but his eyes darted too swiftly to Whimsy's hand, searching for something. "No body yet," Whimsy replied, casually, replacing the blotter page on the mantel. "But a brave effort, I think, to misdirect our sniffing hounds. Coat at the station, cane in the canal." He chalked a cue, sent the white ball clicking into a red. "You play, Mr. Clancy." "Not at the moment." The young man edged toward the door. Whimsy glanced at the heavy cue rack. One slot empty, its brass ferrule missing. He laid the cue gently. "Funny how brass fits brass. When did you first handle Sir Allured's walking stick?" Clancy's veneer cracked. "What are you implying?" "That you and Briggs conspired, you for sovereigns, he for freedom from a family that worked him like a groom, but paid him like a beggar. You stage Nina's flight, keep money and letters. Then Briggs wavers, his conscience pricked by her desperation. So you silence him. Only the colonel's ledger page slips from your coat, and my pencil fishes out your rendezvous note." Clancy bolted. Whimsy's billiard cue thudded across his ankles. Parker, alerted by Whimsy's earlier note, emerged from the next room and tackled him. A packet of damp sovereigns burst from Clancy's pocket like corn from a popper. Daybreak found them on the quarry road. A constable's lamp glimmered in mist, illuminating the missing canoe propped against the hedge. Empty. Beyond, Nina shivered beneath a tarpaulin, alive but gagged, wrists taped with bicycle adhesive. Briggs, conscious now, had directed Parker there in contrition. Vera arrived with Danvers just in time to hear Clancy protest that he acted only to secure funds for their marriage. She looked at him once, said nothing, and turned away, fingers closing over the savings book, as though it were the last plank of a foundering ship. Whimsy removed his hat to the sunrise. The colonel taught them all lessons, some in thrift, some in treachery. One might almost admire the pedagogy if the examination papers hadn't been set in blood. Parker sighed, weary but satisfied. Will the estate survive another scandal? Estates survive. People mend more slowly. But I fancy Vera will plant roses over the canal bank come summer. Better memorial than marble. He watched the dawn scatter gold over Ellerton Court's rain-washed stone. And perhaps, when those fires are lit before supper next winter, they will be tended by hands that have learnt heat should warm, not destroy. Rainwater dripped from the canvas awning of the quarry keeper's hut, beating a patient rhythm while dawn unstitched the last folds of mist. Nina, swaddled in Parker's overcoat, sat on an upturned wheelbarrow, cradling a steaming mug. Her knuckles trembled less from cold than from a long night of bargaining with mortality. Whimsy crouched before her, the quiet inquisitor, Parker hovering just beyond, with a constable and a notebook. Clancy, wrists manacled, was being transferred to the divisional car under Inspector Danvers's watchful eye. His protestations had dwindled to a hoarse monotone no one bothered to refute. Briggs, patched but unshackled, stood nearby, shamefaced, coat collar hunched as if to disguise the oozing stitches at his hairline. "You understand," Whimsy said gently, "that the precise order of events is still blurred. We have a generous supply of motives, and a respectable heap of incriminating trifles. Yet the fatal minute remains obstinately shy. Tell us exactly what passed between you and the colonel after the dinner gong sounded." Nina's gaze drifted to the pallid disk of the rising sun, then settled on her chipped mug. "Bernard summoned me just before 6. He threatened, in that theatrical manner of his, to read extracts at table from my late husband's account books, imply embezzlement, ruin what little standing I possess. He demanded the diamond I wore at my wedding, a vulgar stone, but saleable. I offered him the sovereigns instead. He jeered that I could hardly offer what Sir Allured already owed him. We shouted. Stephen appeared, pulled me away. I left through the French window." Her breath caught. "Bernard was alive and furious. I swear it," Whimsy nodded. "So far it squares with Clancy's version, minus the embroidery. Did you notice the clock in the corridor?" She shook her head. "I never look at that dreadful relic. Briggs says you asked him for the canoe at 9. "I did. Stephen insisted we needed a place to hide until funds cleared, claimed Vera would loan her settlement once the papers were destroyed. I was desperate, too foolish to probe his chivalry." The mug rattled against her teeth. "And you see where that landed me?" "We do," Whimsy murmured. "But the colonel landed on a fireplace 2 hours earlier. Someone intervened between your exit and Sir Allured's re-entry. Clancy places the baronet at the library door, not long after. But Clancy's ledger of truth is spotty. Did you glimpse Sir Allure anywhere?" She hesitated. "Crossing the south corridor at perhaps 10 minutes after 6. I only caught his back, but the dressing gown was distinctive. He seemed flustered. I assumed he had come to calm Bernard," Parker scribbled. "That confirms Allured's admission of a brief visit." "Admission gently wrung," Whimsy corrected. "But a visit need not be lethal. We still have Briggs's window. He lights the fire at 5 to 6, departs, returns by the shed route, glimpses Vera pleading on the stair. Then an interval. Tell me, Briggs, when you re-entered the north corridor after fetching kindling, did you pass anyone?" Briggs rubbed his bandaged head. "Only Miss Vera running out to the library, white as sheets. Looked as if she'd seen a ghost." Vera, presently sleeping in ignorance of dawn's developments, had insisted she never stepped inside. Whimsy filed the contradiction, eyes sharpening. He turned back to Nina. "Did Vera mention encountering Bernard that afternoon?" "She said only that she'd failed to get his signature. I thought nothing of it." She spread her hands in despair. "Peter, are you suggesting Vera?" "I suggest nothing until facts cease contradicting one another. But we must rouse her. Whether to exonerate or implicate, she holds the last clean snapshot of that library." Leaving Parker to escort Nina and Briggs toward the awaiting ambulance, Whimsy walked the quarry road with brisk strides, mind-organizing those snapshots like lantern slides. Clancy for greed, Nina for fear, Allured for honor, Briggs for loyalty. Each motive clear, each means partial. The Colonel's demise required force applied at a specific angle, a left-handed shove, judging by the bruising and the fender mark. Nina was right-handed, Clancy ambidextrous, but tall enough to topple rather than push, Briggs heavily built, but absent. Vera, diminutive, yes, but nerves often lend ferocity, and she wore riding gloves, ideal to muffle the rattle of a dropped link. He arrived ahead of the police convoy. Ellerton Court lay hushed, the yews no longer menaced, merely dripped. In the blue salon, Vera sat upright now, woken by Chivers and staring at the empty Griffin jewel case. Sir Allured, under guard upstairs, had been told of Clancy's arrest. His silence since was total. Vera rose when Whimsy entered, the savings book clasped to her chest. "I heard shouting. Stephen's been taken." "Yes, and Lady Nina found, mercifully alive. But our ledger still lacks its balancing entry, Miss Vera. Were you in the library after 5:50? Colour fled her cheeks. "Aye, only for a moment. Uncle Bernard refused to sign. He taunted me. I begged him to be reasonable. He laughed, said elegance of conscience wasn't a family trait. I lost my temper, snatched at his papers. He seized my wrist. The chain broke." She touched the bruised skin. "I fled. He was unhurt." "Was Sir Allured nearby?" She bit her lip. "He came from the back passage as I ran. Asked what had happened, but I couldn't speak. I believe he went straight in." Whimsy nodded slowly. "Did you notice anything wrong with the hearth rug?" "The rug?" Her confusion seemed genuine. "It's always straight. Aunt insists." So she had not tripped the Colonel. He paced to the fireplace, knelt, and measured distance from fender to floor. A smaller person would have needed leverage, hands on the Colonel's shoulder, weight behind a sudden thrust. But Vera's flight left Bernard upright. The killer therefore arrived after Sir Allured, unless Allured returned twice. A faint chime drifted through the corridor, 7:30. It struck Whimsy like a hand clap. He turned to Vera. "Did you hear the grandfather clock this morning?" "No, The constables stopped it. Again, I think. I doubt that. Listen. They stepped into the corridor. The clock ticked firmly, mine at hand correct. No one had jostled it since Danvers ordered it untouched. Yet the pendulum's brass bob bore a fresh smear of grey wax. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. All our suspects passed this way, but only one carried a candle stub. He strode for the servants' wing, and located Ivy polishing silver beneath an unlit sconce. At his question, she paled and produced a stump of church candle, wick black and crumbling. "Miss Vera gave it me," she stammered. "Said keep it for prayers. I forgot, and last night it broke, dripped on the clock when I dusted after dinner. I cleaned most, truly." "Did you stop the clock?" She wrung the cloth. It stopped by itself. I tapped like Mr. Chivers taught, moved the hands to right time. Didn't think harm. The clock stalled at Ivy's tap. Pendulum jarred, minute hand arrested. Later she restarted it, but in doing so she unwittingly falsified the chronology. The killer need not have touched it at all. He relied on happenstance and Ivy's routine correction to mask the true interval. Who possessed that subtlety? Not Nina, frantic, not Briggs, blunt, not Clancy, opportunist, not Vera, frightened, not Sir Allured, unless he counted on Ivy's habits. Wimsey's pulse quickened. Allured's oft-quoted maxim. Chivers taps it every night. He knew the mechanism's caprices. If he slipped in after Vera, argued, and in sudden despair pushed Bernard, he might gamble that Ivy's dusting would later realign the hands, sealing his moment behind a facade of punctuality. Danvers entered, bearing news. The canoe recovered half a mile downstream. Empty. Nina's footprints confirmed heading on to dry bank at the quarry. Clancy confesses partial plot with Briggs, but denies murder. Says he never re-entered library. "He may speak truthfully for once," Wimsey said, voice gone distant. He turned to Vera. "Your uncle hides behind honor. Let us force honor to speak." To Danvers. "Bring Sir Allured to the North Library, now, and assemble everyone else. The fire is long dead, but the room owes us its last whisper." 10 minutes later, the household gathered beneath the sullen portraits. Sir Allured looked years older, yet retained a battered dignity. Nina, pale but composed, stood between constables. Clancy, handcuffed, nursed a swollen lip. Briggs leaned on a stick. Ivy hovered like a guilty wren. Parker stationed at the desk. Danvers by the door. Wimsey stepped onto the hearthrug, monocle gleaming. "Colonel Calthorpe's death was no devilish conspiracy, merely a human miscalculation. 3 separate schemes collided. Miss Vera's desperate plea, Mr. Clancy's avarice, Lady Nina's flight. But the fatal push belongs to one who sought to shield the family name, even at the price of a friend's life. Sir Allured, when you entered after Vera's exit, what passed?" The baronet's jaw set. "I found Bernard burning papers. He gloated that he would publish my private borrowings, ruin us all. I confronted him. He mocked, called me bankrupt in every sense. We struggled. His foot caught the fender." "And you pushed," Wimsey finished softly. A reflex, not murder in mind, but violence enough. He fell. His neck struck the iron. You knelt, realized what you had done, saw Ivy at the corridor clock. You gambled she would perform her nightly ritual later, thus shifting time forward. Then you hid the cufflink by the grate, intending to claim you had never crossed the room, but forgot Vera had already seen you. Silence expanded. Sir Allured's shoulders sagged. "I thought to ransom the estate from scandal. He was already dead. Nothing would alter that. Yet your concealment endangered Nina, Vera, even Briggs, You struck Briggs in panic when he threatened to summon Danvers." "No." Sir Allure straightened. "I never laid hand on Briggs." Wimsey inclined his head. "Indeed, Briggs was felled by Clancy, tidying loose ends. But it was you who set the stage on which thieves and cowards performed. One half-truth spawns 7 whole lies. Will you complete the account, Sir Allure, and spare your household further damage?" The baronet looked about. Nina's disdain, Vera's wounded trust, Briggs's loyal misery. His eyes settled on the extinct hearth. "Yes," he said at last, "I will tell everything." He extended his wrists toward Danvers without prompting. The inspector's cuffs clicked shut with melancholy inevitability. In that small sound, the draughty library seemed finally to exhale, as though the timbers themselves had been holding a collective breath. Wimsey remained staring at the fireplace, where grey ash still bore the faint indentation of a boot heel, the mark of a man who tried to stamp out flame, and instead extinguished far more than he meant. Outside, the first true spring sunlight pierced the yew avenue, igniting dew like sparks that refused to catch. Parker touched Wimsey's sleeve. "It's finished." "Nothing ever finishes," Wimsey replied, turning away from the grate. "But sometimes it agrees to rest." Inspector Danvers escorted Sir Allure from the library, the pair of constables closing in like slightly moth-eaten bookends, and the shuffling echo of their departure left a hush too wide for comfortable breathing. The heavy door clicked, the key rasped once in the lock, and Ellerton Court seemed to exhale the low, juddering sigh of an organ pipe settling after evensong. Wimsey remained by the dead hearth long enough to flick a final fingerful of ash from the fender, then crossed to join Parker, who was adjusting his notebook with the air of a man afraid the pages might now peel themselves apart and rearrange. Outside, the mullion's rain had given way to a queer provisional sunlight. Drab pigeons strutted upon the sill, as though victory belonged exclusively to them. "I suppose," Parker muttered, "that concludes the matter. Manslaughter at worst, Allure's admissions, Nina's corroboration. The Crown will decide the charge." Not quite concluded. Wimsey's eyes remained fixed on the pigeons. "Imagine, Charles, that one were bent on protecting a proud old name, and one's own conscience in equal measure. Wouldn't it be convenient if the colonel were thought to have died at once? Clean fracture? Instantaneous. A single, unarguable cause renders motive almost respectable. Rash but momentary." Parker frowned. "Post-mortem will confirm the fracture, surely. But may also confirm something else. Dr. Pusey noted superficial bruising, but did not pry further. We took it for granted the fall did the entire deed. I am beginning to wonder if a fall merely concluded what a heart too tired to relish further war had already begun." He stepped to the drop light, lifted the colonel's walking stick, retrieved by a constable from the corner, and unscrewed the ferrule, revealing the hollow interior. A glass ampoule rattled within like a seed in a shell. Wimsey eased it out on the tip of his penknife, held it up to the lamplight. A residue of white crystals clung to the inside. The label once borne by the phial had faded altogether, but a ghost outline of the chemist's stamp, Bangalore Medical Stores, lingered. Parker's skepticism dissolved into fascination. Digitalis? Or something deadlier, procured long ago in the subcontinent, and kept as a tonic against advancing years. Recall Briggs's remark, Colonel always fidgeting at his nerves, dosing himself with pills that looked like sugar lumps. A brittle stimulant may explain the perspiration we smelled beneath paraffin, and the sudden rage that left Sir Allured so thoroughly routed. If Calthorpe swallowed a reckless quantity, heart seized, seizure toppled him, the final shove might be less homicidal than supererogatory. Parker eased the notebook shut, as though reluctant to injure its delicate conclusions. Which means Allured might be condemning himself for an accident already determined by the Colonel's own folly. But why hide that ampoule in the stick? Because pride detests anything that robs a tragedy of its bravura. Picture the Colonel wheezing, aware he has overdosed, shoving the vial into his cane, lest spectators ascribe his outrage to feebleness rather than righteous temper. In his own scripter he must die warrior hard, not enfeebled by apothecary's error. He collapses seconds later. Sir Allured's frantic grab supplies the fatal momentum. Effect: meet convenient cause. Parker blew out a slow breath. The chain of culpability is starting to look like a rosary strung by a mad jeweler. Do we speak to Danvers again? Shortly, but first we test the final link. Whimsy pocketed the ampule and led Parker toward the anteroom, where Dr. Pusey, summoned for a lingering headache, was dosing himself with whiskey rather than laudanum. The little physician jumped when Whimsy produced the glass fragment. "One more glance at the Colonel's chest cavity, Doctor," Whimsy murmured. "Check for petechial hemorrhages. Enlarge the cardiac tissue slides. If I'm wrong, you may toast my foolhardiness. If right, we spare a baronet the difference between felonious intent and foolish catastrophe." Pusey, half alarmed, half eager, scuttled off with a promise to telegraph results before luncheon. Whimsy watched him go, then turned down the corridor where the grandfather clock now ticked with the demure piety of an abbess who has finally found her proper pace. He tapped the case, gently this time, and the pendulum swung on without a stutter. At 9:30, Vera emerged from the blue salon, clutching a new envelope, an advance from the savings bank granted on Whimsy's personal guarantee. Nina, steadied by Briggs's arm, followed like a pale wraith. The two women passed without speech, yet a tiny nod from Vera acknowledged gratitude. Nina replied with the merest lift of her chin, an aristocratic semaphore, conceding equal footing at last. Briggs, freed from formal custody after Clancy's full confession, touched his cap to Whimsy in mute apology, then guided Nina toward the staircase. Parker joined Whimsy in the glazed courtyard, where faint spring sunshine now bathed the stone griffin coat of arms. For people who pride themselves on breeding, Parker mused, they've produced a tangled nest of hatchlings. Breeding, Whimsy observed, is simply heredity with good manners. When manners give way, heredity bears fang and wing. He checked his watch. Pusey should require an hour. Meanwhile, there is Sir Allured's ledger to rectify. Shall we resurrect a few honest figures? The muniment room smelled of vellum, dust, and moral arithmetic. Under Whimsy's direction, Vera, her trustee Mr. Fitch, hurriedly summoned from Hereford, and Parker spread account books across a trestle table. The sums Sir Allured had borrowed to staunch failing tenant farms amounted to less than half what the Colonel had boasted. Interest calculations inflated for private humiliation were trimmed to plausible modesty. When Brycroft, the family solicitor, arrived, he found signatures ready and proof of repayment in the Colonel's bank credit notes, retrieved earlier from the green box. What remained now was merely to reconcile perception with fact, a process every bit as labyrinthine as any murder investigation. A footman appeared, breathless with a telegram. Wimsey tore it open, scanned the lines, and permitted himself one crisp nod. He passed the wire to Parker. Cardiac rupture antecedent to cervical fracture. Toxicology positive. Recommend coroner informed. Pusey. Parker exhaled. Then the fatal blow became postscript. Epigraph, perhaps, but a coroner's jury will record misadventure rather than manslaughter. Sir Alured's honour may yet hobble away with mere cauterized pride. Come, we must stop Danvers before he transports an unnecessary prisoner to Hereford jail. They reached the carriage porch just as Inspector Danvers emerged, coat flying, ready to board the Wolseley. Wimsey intercepted him, pressed the telegram into his palm, and sketched the briefest of summaries. Danvers, brows bristling like startled hedgehogs, read twice, then let out a grunt that might have been relief or irritation in equal measure. "Blast your theories, my lord. They rise out of floors like beetles." "Granted," Wimsey said cheerfully, "but they polish the parquet in passing. Release Sir Allured into house custody. We shall attend the inquest together tomorrow. Meanwhile, Clancy remains on the hook for assault, conspiracy, and theft. His conscience will have to supply the missing corpse." Nina, drawn by commotion, had drifted to the threshold. When Danvers stepped aside, she faced Wimsey across the cobbles. Her voice, still raw, was laced with something approaching rueful amusement. "I threatened a scandal, and ended imprisoned by one of my own making. What redemption does society price at present, Lord Peter?" For society, a donation to the county infirmary, and a season of voluntary obscurity. For yourself, some honest work, perhaps, with fewer feathers in the hat. One discovers humility becomes startlingly chic once compulsory. She laughed, dry tinder catching a brief spark, and turned indoors, Briggs close behind like a shadow, prepared to wait as long as waiting was required. With Sir Allured released and the household afloat on a sea of gently revised ledgers, Wimsey and Parker retreated to the disused summer house overlooking the carp pond. The air smelled of damp reeds and far-off wood smoke from cottages beginning Sunday roast. Wimsey sank into the cracked wicker, stretched long legs, and produced a thin cheroot. "I sometimes think, Charles, that country houses are less architectural achievements than elaborate contraptions for turning secrets into folklore. Feed in a human frailty at the servant's door, and, given sufficient corridors, it emerges in the great hall as legend." Parker struck a match on a stone frog. "Legend has its uses. It warns heirs, entertains villagers, and on occasion saves a magistrate the trouble of explaining complexity to 12 good men and true. Indeed, but legend rarely pays the bailiff. Vera, at least, inherits clarity, and 4,000 very real pounds, courtesy of a dead dragoon's fitful generosity." The Tantrai hut smoked in companionable quiet until the chapel clock chimed 11. Parker flicked ash, gravelled his tone. "You'll remain for the inquest." "Naturally. Besides, I intend to sample Mrs. Goodbody's Sumatran curry. She promises an homage to the Colonel's cavalry days, less lethal, one presumes." Rain began again, soft as feathers against the summer-house panes. Wimsey rose, tossing the cheroot end into the pond, where a carp sucked it down with disconcerting enthusiasm. "Come along, old man. There is a fire to be lit before luncheon, and, with luck, it will do nothing more sinister than warm our toes." They walked back toward the shapely facade of Ellerton Court, its windows glowing steady and sane against the pewter sky. Behind them the reeds whispered and the pond's ripples settled, closing over the small red ember, as though nothing untoward had ever disturbed the surface at all. The morning sun was a pale promise behind a veil of mist when Wimsey and Parker arrived at the coroner's court in Hereford. The town, waking slowly, bore the usual mix of market cries, distant church bells, and the faint scrape of a cart on cobblestones, but the event that drew them was anything but routine. The chamber smelled of polished wood and damp stone, an austere stage for the final reckoning of the colonel's fate. Sir Alured was already present, leaning against the polished railing with a pale expression that seemed to age him beyond his years. His usual composure had fractured alongside the colonel, though his eyes remained sharp, calculating even in defeat. Inspector Danvers hovered nearby, his coat still bearing the faintest smudge of last night's rain, while a small contingent of local dignitaries and legal functionaries filled the seats. The coroner, a solemn man with steel-rimmed spectacles, prepared his notes as the clerk called the rooms to order. Wimsey exchanged a glance with Parker. The morning air of justice was thick with anticipation, and the procession of witnesses would soon unfold like the slow petals of a night-blooming flower, each revealing something vital, yet scented with subtle danger. First came Dr. Pusey, who presented his findings with an understated precision. The slides and notes he laid before the court spoke of a heart weakened and betrayed, microscopic ruptures in the cardiac muscle, faint hemorrhages suggestive of a toxic agent, and, most telling, a delicate bruise beneath the collarbone that the initial examination had overlooked. The combination was not merely consistent with a fall, but indicative of a sudden cardiac rupture preceded by a pharmacological assault. "Your Honor," Pusey concluded, "it is my professional opinion that Colonel Calthorpe's death was precipitated by a sudden cardiac event induced by digitalis poisoning. The subsequent fall and cervical fracture were tragic consequences, not the primary cause." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Wimsey noted how Sir Alured's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Next was Inspector Danvers, who delivered a measured account of the investigation, carefully omitting the ampule hidden within the walking stick until pressed by the coroner. When the vial came to light, it was as if a shard of shattered glass had settled in the minds of the jury. The notion that the colonel had concealed his own poison added a layer of tragic complexity to the tale. Wimsey then called upon Nina Calthorpe. Her appearance drew a breath from the room, her resolve steadier than the night before, the faintest hint of defiance shadowing her pale features. She recounted the tense household atmosphere, the fractiousness between Sir Alured and the colonel's erratic moods. When questioned about the moments before the fall, she spoke cautiously, emphasizing the colonel's fury, but denying any malicious intent on Sir Alured's part. "I was frightened," she admitted quietly, "but I do not believe my uncle intended harm. He was unwell, not cruel." The room held its breath, the tension palpable, before Brycroft, the solicitor, presented the revised financial records. The ledger painted a vastly different picture than the colonel's accusations, revealing a tangled web of attempts at restitution and mismanagement, rather than fraud or malice. The family's fragile reputation, though stained, was spared total ruin. Throughout the proceedings, Sir Alured sat rigid, eyes narrowing each time the narrative veered toward mercy or misunderstanding. Whimsy's gaze lingered on him, a man trapped by his own pride and the weight of secrets, yet paradoxically relieved by the shifting truths. The coroner's questions grew pointed. Was there evidence of foul play beyond the accidental fall? Did anyone administer the poison knowingly? Whimsy answered calmly. The evidence suggests no party actively sought to kill Colonel Calthorpe. Rather, his own pride and failing health combined in a fatal act of self-deception. Danvers interjected, "Nevertheless, the assault by Clancy and the theft of the Colonel's body remain separate matters warranting legal scrutiny." The coroner nodded, noting the distinction. The jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom hushed to an expectant silence. Outside, the morning had brightened, but the clouds still lingered low over the county. Whimsy and Parker lingered in the antechamber, voices lowered. "This verdict," Parker said thoughtfully, "will ripple far beyond Ellerton Court." "Indeed," Whimsy replied, "for it lays bare not just a death, but the brittle underpinnings of family, duty, and pride. And it spares a man from ignominy, if only barely." Their conversation was interrupted by the coroner's return. The jury's decision was unanimous: death by misadventure, the fall precipitated by a cardiac failure, induced by self-administered digitalis. No criminal intent, no manslaughter. Sir Alured released a breath he seemed to have held for days. He met Whimsy's eyes and nodded once, a gesture of reluctant gratitude. The following days were filled with the quiet mechanics of estate settlement and social tidying. Vera took control of her inheritance with a steady hand, determined to restore what she could to dignity and order. Nina, under Briggs's careful protection, began to speak more openly of her experiences, finding solace in the truth finally set free. Whimsy and Parker returned to London with a sense of closure, but also an awareness that the shadows of Ellerton Court would linger in whispered conversations and cautious glances for years to come. On the journey back, Whimsy mused aloud. Every house, every family has its secrets. Some are poison wrapped in sugar lumps, others fractures concealed beneath a veneer of respectability. Parker smiled wryly. And some, one hopes, have a doctor willing to look deeper than the surface bruises. Whimsy flicked ash from his cheroot onto the platform. A good doctor, an observant detective, and a little patience. Sometimes they are all one needs to uncover the truth hidden behind the fall. As the train pulled into the bustling station, the late spring sun broke fully through the clouds, promising new beginnings where old sorrows once reigned. The case was closed, but the lessons it imparted would not be so easily laid to rest. The drawing-room at Ellerton Court was quiet, save for the low tick of the grandfather clock, which seemed to mark not only the passing minutes, but the slow unspooling of a tangled truth. Lord Peter Whimsy stood before the assembled household, the Calthorpes and their retainers, each face a carefully crafted mask, now beginning to crack. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whimsy began, his tone both arch and measured. "It is a curious thing, the way time behaves in country houses. Like the old clock behind me, it sometimes runs a little fast, sometimes slow, yet it invariably demands a reckoning." He paused, glancing first at Sir Alured, whose expression was unreadable, then at Nina, who met his gaze with a flicker of new-found courage. Colonel Calthorpe's demise was indeed precipitated by a fall. Yet, as we have learned, that fall was not the sole author of his end. The fatal rupture of his heart was induced by digitalis poisoning, a poison he administered to himself in secret, hoping to stave off the infirmities of age and the burdens of a bruised spirit. Murmurs fluttered through the room like disturbed birds. But there is more. This poison, this fatal error, might have remained a private tragedy, had it not been for the unfortunate intervention of Sir Alured, whose heated quarrel with the colonel caused a momentary loss of control, a push, a stumble, a fall. An act not of malice, but of human frailty. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. Sir Alured, you must understand. Your pride and desperation to defend your family's honor have nearly condemned you unjustly. Yet, in truth, your action was the final note in a much longer, sorrowful symphony. He turned to Briggs, who nodded quietly, then to Danvers, whose expression betrayed a grudging respect. Clancy's assault and the disappearance of the colonel's body, while criminal, were acts of panic and misguided loyalty, not part of the original tragedy. The ledger's restoration confirms that while debts and tensions strained the household, no financial treachery motivated these events. Whimsy inhaled deeply, folding his hands behind his back. This case, I dare say, is less a murder and more a meditation on human vanity, the corrosive nature of secrets, and the desperate lengths to which we will go to preserve an illusion. He allowed the silence to settle before concluding with a faint smile. As Shakespeare reminds us, the web of our life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill together. Colonel Calthorpe wove such a web for himself, and it ensnared us all. With the truth laid bare, the room exhaled. Sir Alured bowed his head, Nina's eyes glistened, and even the ever-skeptical Danvers seemed momentarily softened. Whimsy stepped aside, lighting a cheroot with a practiced flick. And now, my dear friends, let us hope the fire lit before supper warms the hearth, rather than consumes it. As the household began to disperse, Parker sidled up, murmuring, "Another tangled skein unravelled with elegance and precision, my lord." Whimsy winked. "Elegance, Charles, is merely truth in a well-tailored coat, and as for precision, let us trust the clocks of Ellerton Court run true from this day forth." With that, the two men strolled into the lengthening afternoon, leaving behind the ghosts of secrets and the faint scent of pipe smoke mingling with the spring air.